In this podcast, I'm talking to Jordan Fallis on how to overcome brain fog and optimize your brain health. Enjoy. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Energy Blueprint podcast. I'm your host, Ari Whitten, and today I have with me the founder of Optimal Living Dynamics, Jordan Fallis. For the past 10 years, he's worked as a health and science journalist and media and communications advisor in Ottawa, Canada. He's written for the Canadian Broadcast Corporation, the Canadian Medical Association Journal, and the Canadian Pharmacists Journal. He's now finishing up his Master's of Science in human nutrition, and his passion is discovering valuable cutting-edge brain and mental health solutions and sharing them with people that desperately need them. And I'll also mention on a personal note that I've read a number of his articles on his site, and he does really great work around brain health. So welcome to the show, Jordan. It's been a long time in the making, and we finally were able to connect and make this happen.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, my pleasure. So first of all, why the interest in brain health? You know, you're a young guy. You're not like, somebody who's in their 80s or 90s suffering from neurological disease. There shouldn't necessarily be this deep personal connection with brain health as a result of some personal brain related story for a guy your age. But what led you down this path?
Yeah, well, it was 2010 and I had a really, really bad concussion. So I had some concussions leading up to that, but in 2010, it was just a really bad one. And I had to drop out of school. I had to stop working. I just had to stop everything and try to get better. But unfortunately, when I went to the doctors, they weren't able to help me. So I had to keep searching for solutions myself, and just looked and looked and looked, went to different practitioners, started doing research myself. But yeah, it took me quite a long time to completely recover. And so that's how I got into it. I just started researching and writing, and I thought that was the best way to go about it. It's kind of hard to publish what I'm writing about in publications, I guess. So I just kind of set up my own website and started researching and writing, and it all stems back to that really bad concussion in 2010. So,
yeah. If you don't mind me asking, how did you get the concussion?
Yeah, so I fell down the stairs in my home. It was my birthday, and all my roommates gave me way too much alcohol, and so it's actually quite embarrassing way to fall down the stairs. But that's how it happened. And
you had two neurotoxic elements working against you that night: the alcohol mixed with a concussion.
Yeah, it wasn't good. So then I hit my head on the railing, and then also on the way down as well. So I had double impact.
Jeez.
But then leading up to that, I played rep hockey as well. So there's body checking. I think I've had a bunch of different other minor concussions over the years. So and then also I had really bad depression and anxiety leading up to that. So it was kind of a whole life-changing type of experience where I had to sort everything out, right? And that's how I got into it. Yeah.
And what were the main symptoms that you dealt with as a result of that?
So I had really bad brain fog. I had dizziness, so chronic dizziness. So that was really annoying because it just never went away. Fatigue, headaches. And then also when this happened, when I had my really bad concussion at home, there was a bunch of black mold in the basement as well. So it's hard to say. It was just kind of all these things together kind of turned my life upside down. So so then I had depression and anxiety. I already kind of had that leading up to it, but it got really, really bad after that. I was depleted. I lost a lot of weight. It wasn't pretty. So I'm glad I've got far away from that moment. But that's pretty much what happened. Mm-hmm.
Well, I think that's a nice segue into what I want to talk about, what I want to spend most of this podcast talking about, which is brain fog. So you've, as a result of your personal story and trying to recover from your own symptoms, you did a ton of research around brain health and brain fog specifically. So kind of take me into your paradigm from 30,000 feet. What does this look like as far as the big picture framework of what are the triggers of why most people would have brain fog related symptoms? And assuming that they didn't get drunk and fall down a staircase.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think one of the first things I like to look at is food. So I want to make sure that their diet isn't ridiculous and they don't have a bunch of like eating gluten or dairy or corn, soy, all the common food allergens. Usually for people who have really bad brain fog, cleaning up your diet isn't going to reverse it. Well, in my case, it definitely didn't. And I have a feeling in a lot of cases it goes beyond food. So I don't think diet and nutrition is going to be, I guess, the main thing that changes everything. But I think in some situations, if people clean up their diet, they'll see a significant improvement in mental clarity and overall brain function. So especially if people have undiagnosed celiac disease or gluten intolerance. So I had like really bad asthma and acne from gluten as well and from dairy. And clearing that up by cutting out gluten and dairy, my skin cleared up, my asthma cleared up, and then my brain fog improved as well. But it wasn't enough. But I would say most people should start there with food. I usually recommend like a paleo-based diet. So it doesn't need to be exactly paleo. I think it's like a good template, right? So
Yeah.
Going from there is a good place to start for most people. And I think if they follow something like that, they should see improvements in brain fog. So that's like the first step. But there's usually a number of other problems that can happen as well, like hormones. I think that's maybe number 2. I really think people need to check hormones and in particular making sure they don't have any sort of subclinical hypothyroidism, or full-blown hypothyroidism, because a lot of doctors, they miss that. They don't necessarily check free T3, for example. And so in my case, my free T3 was very low, but my TSH and T4 looked fine. So no one said anything, right? So I think looking at hormones like thyroid hormone, testosterone as well for men especially. So again, in my case, I had normal total testosterone, but my free testosterone fell. It was like at the level of like a 90-year-old man. So that was probably one reason why I felt like I was old and aging. So and so I think there are a lot of people walking around with undiagnosed thyroid conditions and low testosterone, and they just don't know it. And so I think investigating hormones overall is very important, and even checking for like IGF-1, for example. That was one thing I didn't really even think of for a long time. But checking insulin-like growth factor 1, because, well, in my case, I had the brain injuries, right? So a lot of people with brain injuries, their hormones can be completely thrown off and just they're a mess. So, but I think even in the general population, I think there's a lot of people with low hormones. So those are like the 2 main things that I would look at. But there's other reasons, like other non-physical reasons. So like things like trauma and nervous system dysregulation. So
let's get into some of these other causes in a moment, but I want to maybe zoom out just a little bit. So like before we talk about some of the other specific causes, what's actually going on at the brain level in terms of physiological mechanisms, biochemical mechanisms, and so on, that are actually creating these symptoms of brain fog. And there's sort of a variety of different theories that I've seen from people talking about brain fog. Some people talk more about neuroinflammation, others talk more about excitotoxicity. Some people talk about leaky blood-brain barrier or mitochondrial dysfunction. What's your take on sort of the mechanisms at the brain level?
I think it's a combination of most of those things, or all of those things. I think it's multiple things at once. I don't think you can pinpoint one thing. I do think inflammation is a huge part of it. You had mentioned leaky gut, and then leaky brain as well. So the gut-brain axis is very critical when it comes to brain fog. So I think it's all these different things. I think mitochondrial dysfunction, that's a big part of it as well. And the thing is a lot of like these underlying factors like mitochondrial dysfunction and leaky gut, they cross over from just general brain fog to people with depression, people with chronic fatigue syndrome, people with fibromyalgia. There's these underlying factors that are common between all of them, right? And brain fog is sort of part of depression, and people with chronic fatigue syndrome tend to have brain fog as well. So I think it's it's all these things at happening at once. And I can't really say exactly what one thing it would be. I think it's probably a combination of all of them all together. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I have to say that myopic singling out of one particular mechanism in isolation and saying this is the only thing that's going on, I think is almost always misguided. And there's far too many people that are doing it. And these things are all vicious cycles. And you can conceptualize one as sort of the crux or the most important one, but there's a lot of people that are just saying, hey, it's all about this one thing. And so, it's all about psychological stress. So all you need is to meditate and recite these affirmations and so on.
Yeah. And I think like people get really close specifically on one thing that they specialize in, which makes sense. When you really zero in and study and you're like an expert on that one thing, you kind of forget about the big picture. And so in my case, I've been looking at all these different things. And so it's hard to really say exactly. If I had to say one, I would think mitochondrial dysfunction would be the main one, and all the other ones kind of linked to that. But it's still they're all intertwined, I guess. Yeah.
Totally. So you mentioned nutrition. You mentioned hormones. I want to come back to hormones later and maybe talk some details there. But what are some of the other big causes or triggers of brain fog for most people?
I think another big one would be just general toxicity, like neurotoxicity. And I guess linked to that would be also the drugs people are taking as well. So I was eventually put on a bunch of psychiatric drugs after my concussion to deal with the symptoms of depression, anxiety. So I know firsthand how these drugs can cause some, I think, damage to the brain. And I think they're, especially when they start piling on different drugs, it can be a toxic mix of drugs, right? So, and I think there's a lot of different people who are, put on these drugs and they're experiencing negative symptoms, including brain fog from these drugs. And it's not just psychiatric drugs; it can be even antibiotics and antihistamines and antipsychotics, which actually that falls under psychiatric drugs. But anyways, it's all these drugs I think overall can cause damage. And now not everyone is on drugs, but an increasing amount of people are taking drugs. So I think if someone's experiencing brain fog, they do need to look closely at the drugs they're taking. And the thing is with me is it kind of built up over time. And at first I thought I was okay taking these drugs, but then it was like increasingly becoming toxic over time. And so I didn't really connect the dots at first. So yeah, that's another part of my story is I feel like I had like a chemical brain injury as well with the drugs and the mold. Anyways, it's kind of all a mess, but I think that's also a big part of it. And even after people come off these drugs, often they can still experience brain fog and mitochondrial dysfunction. Like a lot of people would take, I forget the specific class of antibiotics, but they get negatively affected by the antibiotics, and even after they're done taking them, they have pretty severe mitochondrial dysfunction and brain fog. So I think that's another big part of it. And then not just drugs, but there's so many different chemicals and heavy metals in the environment that I think most people have them in their body, or everyone does. And so that's another part of it as well, is the accumulation of different heavy metals like lead and mercury. So that's I guess another really big piece of it. And then and I guess wrapped up in toxicity would be also environmental EMFs as well, that I think are a problem. And I think people who develop like EMF sensitivity, in my opinion, it's not necessarily the EMFs that are such a huge problem, although I do think they are. It's just when people start picking up on the EMFs in their environment, I guess it becomes an issue of their body is already so toxic that now they're experiencing EMF sensitivity as well. And so I have some history with that as well. So anyway, so that I think that's another big part of it is toxicity from different chemicals and drugs and environmental toxins. Yeah.
What about the role, I'll mention a few things, chronic stress, nervous system dysregulation, past trauma, poor circulation, blood sugar dysregulation, lack of physical activity. Do you consider any of those to be major players in this?
Yeah, I think chronic stress and anxiety would be a big part of it as well. And even yeah, just trauma from years ago as well, from like childhood trauma could be a big part of it as well. Because I think in some instances people have brain fog almost as if like a defense mechanism from whatever stressful situation they're going through or they have gone through, and sometimes the fog doesn't go away. So I guess I would fall under like depersonalization and derealization. But yeah, I think that's a big part of it as well, because like I had some trauma from my childhood and growing up as well before the head injury. And so a big part of my recovery was doing things like neural feedback and EMDR, so eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. So those are just, well, EMDR especially is a trauma-based therapy. And then neural feedback, well, that's also trauma-based therapy, but it's more focused on calming the nervous system. It's kind of like advanced meditation, right? So, yeah, so all that to say, I think focusing on trauma and stress and calming the nervous system, whether that's just meditation or finding a neurofeedback practitioner, is very important. And I think it's not always appreciated, because I think a lot of people are walking around with trauma and stress built up, some worse than others. But yeah, and if you have brain fog, I think for a lot of people it is a key part of it as well. Not always though. I do think for some people they need to look there instead of always chasing the next supplement or the next physical ailment that may be causing it, right? So yeah, that's what I think about that anyways.
Gotcha. What do you think of blood sugar dysregulation, maybe just from poor diet or poor metabolic health, and also poor circulation, and the idea that there isn't enough oxygen being delivered to the brain?
Yeah, I have seen studies, especially with people with chronic fatigue syndrome, that they found, I guess it was lack of blood flow to the brain. So I think for people with chronic fatigue syndrome, I think that's a key part of it. And then also with blood sugar, like low blood sugar can definitely contribute to brain fog. And I think, yeah, trying to get rid of all refined carbohydrates from the diet can be pretty important, especially if you're struggling with brain fog. And just sticking with things like sweet potatoes and just lots of fruits and vegetables can make a big difference. And then obviously eating enough protein and fat. But yeah, it's those are also very important parts.
Yeah. What do you think of the role of neurotransmitters in all of this? And this is something that I will say I've encountered quite a lot of mixed information on, and I'm generally somewhat skeptical of neurotransmitter-based discussions and explanations of things at this point, because from what I think there's been a lot of reductionism around this, and starting with the whole conceptualization of depression as a serotonin deficiency and the need for SSRIs. And, there's been a huge narrative around understanding mental health problems as neurotransmitter imbalances. And I think that is extremely reductionistic and is missing a lot of, key parts of the picture, many of which you've already mentioned. But also, you see people kind of explaining symptoms based on, are you dominant in this neurotransmitter or that one? From what I can tell, the actual testing for neurotransmitters is really complex and not that scientifically valid in a lot of cases. Like, you can do urinary measurements of certain neurotransmitters, but it doesn't necessarily, it's not valid data in many cases where they've done research to show that, hey, if your urine shows this neurotransmitter is low, then we know that means that you have low neurotransmitter, that neurotransmitter is low in the brain. A lot of that scientifically validating research isn't really there. But what is your general take on neurotransmitters? Do you conceptualize them as having a small or a really big role in all of this?
I don't think I agree with almost everything you said. I think the testing is not reliable. I do have a lot of people come to me and they say, I think I have low serotonin or low dopamine. And I do think it's interesting to research it and learn about it and learn about how you can increase dopamine and increase serotonin and increase oxytocin, for example. And I've even wrote articles about that. But I don't think, I still picture it as managing symptoms. If you're taking something to boost dopamine, or you're taking something to calm yourself down, like with different supplements and herbs, I still think it's taking the approach of the pharmaceutical industry, essentially, and which is not, I don't agree with that approach overall, and I don't think it's based on good science, right? And so it's more marketing by the pharmaceutical industry than it is real science. So, but I do think it can be valuable, because I'm just interested in everything about the brain. So it's like I'm interested to know what can boost dopamine and how people can use those things to support themselves day to day. But I don't think it's the root cause. And I don't think people should focus on it as much as they do. And when a lot of people come to me and they're taking amino acids for dopamine or amino acids for the mood, that's fine. That's great. But I think there's probably other directions people need to go to get better. And so, like before, I used to take, for example, DL-phenylalanine, which supports dopamine, supports my mood. But I don't anymore because I went in another direction and started doing some other things that seemed to be more permanent. I don't need to take it as much now. So, so that's how I see it anyways. And I agree that the testing isn't sound. Scientific.
I want to come back to what you just said about, going in another direction and talk specifics there. But first, I want to ask you, what is your sort of general approach to assessing what triggers may be going on in a person who has brain fog, and how do you sort of help them figure out, which of these different triggers that you've just mentioned might be the major factor for them?
Well, I usually ask them to, I guess, give me an entire history of what's happened to them. And I try to ask for like the most in-depth type of information that they can give me, as much as they feel comfortable doing it. And then based on that, I also ask for like any blood tests or any blood tests or the supplements they're taking or the medications and their history overall. And from there, I can kind of see patterns. I guess it's not the most regimented scientific type of approach, but and then also talking to the person, I can kind of see where they're coming from and what they've gone through. And so for example, I'll see some people contact me and I do a consult with them, and they're taking so many supplements, but they have like the worst anxiety ever. And they've tried every supplement. They're like, oh, what supplement should I take? Should I do this? Should I do that? And then I find out that they may have had a really rough childhood, or they were bullied, or they've been diagnosed with PTSD, and they're trying to find nutrients to help them. And so I try to point them in a different direction. I say, go check out neurofeedback or EMDR, for example. And then, so that it's hard to say exactly how I approach it, but
pattern recognition. I mean, it's what you're talking about is basically your own clinical experience and knowledge, the amalgam of all of that and experience of working with people, that your brain is looking for patterns in all of the data that you're assessing. And then, for every individual that you're seeing, you're going to pick up on a particular pattern and say, oh, I think, it's more of these causes and less of these causes.
Yeah. And I also try to help people try to find practitioners in their area that I think can really help them too. So I'm not the one trying to fix them, I guess you could say. I'm just trying to be a guide, because I've gone through so much that it's like, I feel like I've gone through it all. So, well, probably not all, but a lot. So I know what people are going through, and I know where they should focus. So I'm kind of more of a guide than a complete problem solver. And for a lot of these people that I'm dealing with, they're like me, and they got really sick, right? And it's going to take some time, and so it can be tricky, right? So I try to just point people in the right directions and get them on the right track. So
gotcha. I want to come back to a couple of things that you mentioned in passing before. One is nervous system dysregulation. So do you want to talk a bit more about what you mean by that, and kind of what's going on a mechanism level?
Yeah, sure. So I guess when I think of nervous system dysregulation, maybe that's not the best way to put it, but I think of trauma and the body's response to trauma and holding on to stress. So I think of, I picture the things that really helped me. So the EMDR, like I mentioned, neurofeedback, and even something called somatic experiencing, which is a type of trauma therapy. It's a really good book, The Body Keeps Score, by, I forget the doctor's name right now, but anyway, so that's what I picture when I'm talking about nervous system dysregulation. So and when I went to my neurofeedback practitioner, she did this QEEG brain mapping. So she looked at all my brain waves and she found like electrical abnormalities in my brain waves. So yeah, I guess that's what I'm picturing. I'm thinking people who have trauma and it's actually like stored in their energy and in their body, and it's not a pure physical problem per se. So yeah, that's how I see it.
Gotcha. And what do you, well, actually, I'm going to save the practical side of things for a minute. There's two other things I want to circle back to. One is hormones. You mentioned hormones as the second factor, second big sort of cause of all this. In my experience, there's a lot of sort of disconnected thinking of hormones with nutrition and lifestyle habits. And sort of we see hormones, many people see hormones as being sort of disconnected. They're sort of these hormones in our bodies that are sort of doing their own things separate from nutrition and lifestyle. But, you know, a lot of the things that you're talking about, for example, free T3, you know, thyroid hormone or IGF-1, and, you know, pretty much the vast majority of other hormones are intimately tied to nutrition and lifestyle habits. So for example, just circadian rhythm and sleep are going to have a big impact on, you know, thyroid hormone levels. Nutrition and protein intake and things like that are going to impact IGF-1 levels. Certainly it's possible to have sort of genetic abnormalities or serious medical conditions that might be affecting hormones in a particular way despite good nutrition and lifestyle habits. But can you talk a bit about maybe some of that connection between the hormones, and maybe just mention a few examples of hormones and sort of nutrition and lifestyle strategies that might be connected to them?
Yeah, so for example, like with thyroid, red light therapy can be very helpful for the thyroid, and I found that to be very helpful as well. And then for testosterone, for example, making sure you eat enough saturated fat and cholesterol can be pretty critical for the production of testosterone. And with IGF-1, for example, I found out that colostrum, taking colostrum powder, like supplementing with colostrum, can also increase IGF-1. So there definitely are these lifestyle and dietary factors that can increase it. But I guess I would say that for some people and for people who are very sick, I think it can be, or who have gotten really sick, if someone hasn't dealt with really like chronic diseases for most of their life, I think a lot of these lifestyle and dietary factors may keep their testosterone and their thyroid functioning optimally. But I think for some people, they may still need like a low dose desiccated thyroid or testosterone cream while they either for the rest of their life, or while they try to figure out exactly why they're still in like the lower end of the range, for example. So I guess I'm a part of the camp that isn't against hormone replacement. I guess there are some people who think it's a problem, but I think if someone's really sick, they need all the support they can get, and so that's how I see it. And yeah, so lifestyle and diet for sure, very important, but sometimes not quite enough. So.
Sure. Yeah, I gotcha. I think, you know, from my perspective, you just have to be, I agree with what you said. I think you just have to be a little cautious and sort of jumping immediately. Like if you have a hormone issue, then immediately to hormone replacement, because, you know, there are just so many people who are not doing foundational stuff to support good hormones, who are then looking to pills and injections to fix their hormone levels instead of working on foundational stuff. And I think that is, in my experience, like sort of a no-win game. Like you just, it tends not to get you anywhere productive.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, I guess it's human nature to try to look for the quick fix and instant gratification. So I definitely agree that the foundational stuff should be done first, and then see where you're at from there, and do everything in your power to get your levels up, especially your T3. And then if that's not enough, then finding a doctor who will help you with hormone replacement can be critical. But yeah, I agree. Like the foundation is, you need to start there. Yeah.
Gotcha. One other thing I wanted to circle back to is you mentioned phenylalanine as far as dopamine boosting, and then you said you took that for a while, and then you decided to pursue other routes that were more effective for you. What do you mean by that, and why did you discard the sort of pill approach for other things, or maybe you replaced it with other different pills? Can you talk more specifics around that?
Yeah. So I didn't replace the DL-phenylalanine with any other pills. So the thing about the DL-phenylalanine is I found that it helped me deal with anxiety and trauma. So then when I did neurofeedback and EMDR, I was able to drop it. Now DL-phenylalanine also boosts dopamine. So I also get enough sunlight, or I try to get more sunlight. And then also blocking blue light at night seems to help. And so those are the main things I did to get off the phenylalanine. But the main ways were the EMDR and neurofeedback, because it seemed to help with trauma. And I find that so the therapists I've talked to and worked with, they have found that DL-phenylalanine also helps other patients of theirs who have trauma as well. And so I don't know exactly how it works, but yeah, it was helpful for that. And then once I did those therapies, I was able to drop it. And I think there's probably other instances like that. Can't really recall right now, but and yeah, in my protocol, or the supplements I take, they're changing over time too. And I've always tried to reduce the amount of stuff I take as I've healed and got better. And I think that should be everyone's goal. You don't want to have to be taking so many supplements. But yeah, and even things like red light therapy can really help people's health significantly, and that can wipe out a need for so many different supplements. So that's one of the things. Like there's some big picture or big impact therapies that can be done that people don't focus on, and they're chasing all these different supplements, which is fine. I understand it, but long term, I think you need to shift into some of the like more permanent foundational things that can really like supercharge your health and your mental health. So,
yeah. Well, I'm with you on red light therapy.
Yeah, I've been recommending your book to different people because it's like the best resource now that I know of.
Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate that. Speaking of which, I'm curious, you didn't mention, you mentioned red light therapy a couple times, but I'm curious, and you actually also mentioned sunlight as far as in the context of dopamine. But as far as causes of brain fog, do you conceptualize light as playing a big role there, and from both the perspective of sort of sunlight, vitamin D production in the skin, cholesterol sulfate, dopamine synthesis in the brain, and then you also mentioned blocking blue light at night, so circadian rhythm related influences of sunlight. What's your take on that, the role of that in the context of brain issues?
Yeah, I think it's a big part too, because I think a lot of people have deficiencies in vitamin D. And so I think most people need to check their vitamin D and make sure it's within optimal range, especially here in Canada. Like, I think there's so many people who they don't even know. If I bring up vitamin D, they don't really know they know what vitamin D is, but I don't think they're checking. They don't check. And so, yeah, vitamin D is a big part of it as well. And then even just getting enough light, especially in the morning, and then blocking the light out at night can be a huge game changer for people in their health and with brain fog.
Yeah.
And then, and getting enough red and infrared light, especially for the brain, infrared light, right, within the around 850 nanometers, I'd say. So, and the Vitalight device is really good for that. And there's other devices that you discuss in your book that are really good too. So, yeah, I think light is another thing that, people don't really pay attention to too much. So I think it's just another thing that needs to be on people's radar, especially with the brain fog. If they're not getting any sun into their eyes, like that was a thing for me for the longest time. I wore contacts and glasses, and my eyes were just shielded from the sun for so long. And so, and I think there's probably a lot of other people who are like that. So yeah, getting more light for sure can really, really help.
Awesome. One other question, and then I want to go a little practical. And you mentioned a few practical strategies already, but I want to go a little deeper in that. You mentioned before in your personal story that you suffered from depression for a while, and I think also anxiety, correct?
Yeah, both.
So have you found any, particular things that are especially helpful for depression and anxiety, maybe that are separate and uniquely helpful for those things relative to brain fog? Or is it, in your experience, mostly the same sort of amalgam of different causative factors and things that you need to focus on?
Same causative factors, I'd say. Especially with anxiety, it's different. I think with depression and brain fog, I think they're very similar. Yeah, so a lot of the same things for depression that helped me for depression also have helped me with brain fog. They've improved side by side. So, for example, the red light, infrared light can improve mood, but then also brain fog can improve as well. So, yeah, I think they're very similar. And like, for example, one supplement I used to take, I don't take it as much anymore, but like it's methylene blue. So that tends to support brain function and can clear brain fog for some people. And then it can also improve mood too. So and methylene blue works by supporting mitochondrial function. So that's just an example.
Cool. Well, with that in mind, let's go deeper into the practical side of things. So we've talked about all these different causes of or triggers of brain fog, and and sort of the mechanisms behind it, and nervous system dysregulation, and blood sugar issues, and nutrition, and hormones, and a number of other things that you mentioned, toxins, and so on. What are some of the big strategies that you found to be most helpful in helping people overcome brain fog?
Well, I'm thinking, so one of the main things I did after my concussion was I did a combination of ear acupuncture and laser therapy at a practitioner's clinic. So it was the combination of both. And so I remember, this was a while ago, but I remember those two together, it was synergistic, and I seemed to really see a huge improvement in my brain fog. It's hard to say exactly which one made the biggest impact, but I do think it was probably the red light therapy and the laser therapy. So I would recommend people look into that more, and because that can really help with brain fog. Neurofeedback did as well, because it reduced stress so much and reduced anxiety that my brain fog improved. I also had pretty high alpha brain waves, which you would think would be a good thing, but people with brain injuries can often, their alpha brain waves can get too high, and then things get foggy. So, and the key thing is to find a neurofeedback practitioner that offers like QEEG brain mapping. So then she can, or he can, look at all your brain waves and see where there are abnormalities, and then put together a protocol just for you. So you're like, one person's brain fog may be caused by a different dysregulated brainwave, if that makes sense, and then compared to someone else. So you really need to find a practitioner that can put together a protocol for you, instead of just doing generalized neurofeedback. You really need to find someone who knows what they're doing. I think it's worth doing that. So those two things in particular were really helpful.
Gotcha. What about some of these things like improving circulation and oxygen delivery to the brain? Do you have any particular strategies that you found effective for that?
Yeah, so the first thing that comes to mind is ginkgo biloba. So that's a herb, and that seems to help people, particularly people who have brain fog when they're older. So people with I guess mild cognitive impairment or pre-dementia. So that seems to really help. Methylene blue that I mentioned earlier, that seems to help a lot of people. It is a drug, though, so I do need to say be careful and look into it. But at low doses, it seems to really help with blood flow and mitochondrial function. So those are the two main ones that I can think of. And just eating a clean whole food diet can make a huge difference as well. And then, of course, exercise. But I usually don't bring up exercise because it's just everyone talks about exercise, like it's just everyone agrees exercise is good. And so I try to give more advanced different things for people to try. But yeah, exercise.
Yeah, I'm with you. At the same time, I think there might be a lot of people, who are on the more sedentary end of things, who are maybe trying to address their circulation and oxygen delivery issues to the brain by jumping immediately to supplements, for example, when, maybe what they really need is to build up their cardiovascular health.
Yeah, no, you're right. It's, because I guess in my world, I feel like I've been so screwed for so long that exercise is like, I don't even think about it. You know what I mean? Like,
It's a given. You're kind of like assuming that everybody is already health conscious and doing, foundational stuff like that.
Yeah, that's how I see it. So, but yeah, definitely exercise is important, especially for blood flow to the brain. Yeah.
Gotcha. You mentioned toxins earlier. I'm curious if you have any thoughts on sort of, maybe not necessarily how to avoid toxins. I think probably most of the listeners to this podcast are familiar with, a lot of material that I've taught and what, other people on this podcast have taught. But do you have any thoughts on, sort of purging toxins from the system and any particular methods that you use and recommend?
Yeah, well, one thing that really helped me with toxins was something called biotherapeutic drainage. So I don't know if other people have talked about that, but there was she's like a bioenergetic practitioner, and she practiced auricular medicine. She used all these different things to help me get better. And one part of it was biotherapeutic drainage. It's hard to explain exactly what it is. I guess I just recommend people Google it and read about it. But that seemed to also help with my brain fog, and it's something to look into because I have heard that other people who have chronic fatigue syndrome have benefited from it. I've seen some anecdotal stories of people who've done it and they've gotten better with it. So again, it depends on the practitioner, I guess. It's I can't wholeheartedly recommend it. It's similar to neurofeedback. I know who I work with and I know what they did for me, right? So, but I think, yeah, you brought up toxins, and I guess it's very hard to explain. I don't really know how to explain it. I'd recommend people just look it up. But yeah, biotherapeutic drainage was helpful for me for sure. Okay,
cool. We talked about blood sugar dysregulation, and you mentioned getting refined carbs out of the diet. EMFs, I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on, I'll mention a couple other things. So EMFs and leaky gut and leaky blood-brain barrier. Do you have any good tips on how to deal with any of those?
Yeah, so when I was really trying to improve my gut health, it was a while ago. So I did a few things. So I saw a doctor and he recommended I do colon hydrotherapy. So that was very helpful. It wasn't the most comfortable procedure, I will say that, but it was, so I still had some asthma and acne when I went and did it. And that just was gone. My skin cleared up, my asthma went away, and my brain function improved as well. And then another thing that this doctor had given me was something called Ozovit. It's I think it's magnesium peroxide. It was just a supplement that I took on an empty stomach, and that seemed to heal up my gut and improve my digestion a lot as well. Things like activated charcoal and bentonite clay was helpful around that time as well. And then things like collagen and bone broth and just healthy fats like olive oil, egg yolks. I'm sure people are familiar with these things. And I'm trying to think of what else. Yeah, fermented foods like sauerkraut and probiotics. And I kind of just went all out with my gut health and I saw significant improvements. But the colon hydrotherapy and the Ozovit was very helpful. And then also Beeler broth. I don't know if you've heard of that or people.
I haven't actually, no.
Yeah, it's just if you Google it, it's just a mix of specific type of vegetables. It's just like a soup, but there's something about the soup that is apparently very good. I haven't looked into it enough, but a practitioner I worked with recommended it highly, and I did it. There were certain days, like on a Saturday or a Sunday, I would just drink that and eat the soup for the whole day. Mm-hmm. And this was around the same time that I was doing all these other gut health things. So it's hard to pinpoint exactly what made the biggest difference, but all of it together seemed to make a big difference. So, yeah.
Gotcha. Any thoughts on leaky blood-brain barrier? Are you aware of any strategies that can help seal that up?
I have read, I believe resveratrol can help. Avoiding gluten for sure is a big part of it. So if you have leaky gut, or leaky brain, avoiding that is a big part of it. Avoiding dairy, just reducing inflammation in the gut overall is a good step for that. Trying to think of what else. I know, I think I came across some research about EMFs disrupting the blood-brain barrier, but I guess there's not much people can really do. They're everywhere, right? So I try not to worry too many people about that, but it is a concern. Yeah, I think that's all I can think of right now. I wrote an article with a bunch of different ways I can help, but I really can't recall them all right now. But, yeah.
Gotcha. Well, this has been great, Jordan. I really appreciate your time here. I'm wondering if we can kind of sum up. You know, you've gone very deep in this whole topic of brain health, apart from brain fog specifically, but you know, really everything brain health related. In all of your research and what you've put together and all of the stuff you've taught and the articles you've written, how would you sum up, let's say, apart from brain fog specifically, let's say somebody just wanted to have a healthy brain for the rest of their life and avoid neurological diseases that are, you know, becoming such epidemics like Parkinson's and Alzheimer's disease. What would be your top 3 recommendations for those people to focus on in their effort to keep a highly functional, healthy brain for the rest of their life?
Well, I would say exercise would be number 1. I just think that's a no-brainer.
Forget the fun, right?
Yeah, I just said it and I didn't even realize. Yeah. Dealing with trauma and stress and just calming down as much as possible. I think that's a big part of it, because stress just destroys your brain. So I think that would be number 2. Number 3, I'd say just having family and friends and socializing. So that's not much of it's not like it's indirectly going to affect your brain health. So I think, like even I have like a history of getting so caught up in my health and trying to figure things out that I kind of forget about family and friends. And I think it's pretty critical. So those would be my 3. Yeah.
Excellent. Good choice on the last one. I agree with you. It's a much neglected factor and definitely a huge factor in health. And, you know, certainly there's research on that, like, you know, kind of scary research linking loneliness and social isolation to a variety of negative health outcomes, including, you know, depression and all sorts of nasty brain related stuff.
Yeah. It's like worse than smoking. I think.
Yeah.
I don't know how, I may have just read that on a random news article. So I don't know how accurate that is, but yeah, it's pretty bad. Yeah.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Jordan. This has been a pleasure. I'm really glad that we finally got to connect. And if somebody wants to reach out to you for further help, if they want to maybe do a consultation with you or just follow your work, where can they get a hold of you?
So yeah, you can just search Optimal Living Dynamics. So it's optimallivingdynamics.com. If you just search my name, it should be one of the first couple links on Google. So yeah, that's where I just publish my work, and some people like it, so I just keep doing it. So
it's good stuff, man. I like it. I highly recommend everybody listening to go follow Jordan's work. He publishes a great blog, and if you care about your brain, and you should, definitely go check out his work.
Yeah, and then I guess I have a Facebook page too and Twitter, but yeah, if you go to my website, you'll be able to find where you can find me. So yeah.
Cool. Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Jordan. I really appreciate your time, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thanks, you too.
Hey there, this is Ari again. One more quick thing before you go. Just make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, The Energy Blueprint, and also make sure to subscribe to this podcast on your favorite podcast platform, whether that's iTunes or Stitcher or anything else. I hope you guys enjoyed this interview, and I will see you again next week.